What were some of your shadow relationship aspects?
Relationships are dangerous. You're going to lose something. You're going to lose your life. You're going to lose your freedom. And you've got to weigh up, are all of those losses worth what you're going to get? And it's dangerous because when you meet somebody, you don't know what they're actually going to give and what they're going to come with. After the discussions in the shadow work, I realized that actually that's not an equation at all. That's absolutely not how it works at all.
It's something you made up.
Yeah, you give in a relationship. That's all you have to do. There's no losing anything. But as long as you're a happy, authentic person in your own life, you carry on living your life, and it's just enhanced by that extra person in your life. There's nothing that you've lost. All you've done is gain.
My guest today, Minos, is a father of 4, qualified as a lawyer but worked as a law clerk. We're a civil engineer. Currently, you're a Bowen therapist.
That's correct.
So quite a change of life there. Now, I know this because you've told me before that you've been a millionaire not once but twice. I find that quite fascinating. We may not go into that story, but I just wanted to bring that up as a part of your introduction. And then you grew up in South Africa, and you're a recent graduate of my shadow work program. And so there's a few things that we could discuss today. So welcome, Minos, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Okay, so slight correction there. I grew up actually in Zimbabwe.
Oh.
And I moved to South Africa when I was in my early 20s to study. So I went to uni in South Africa. And yeah, the millionaire thing's not such a good credential, is it? Like getting it and then losing it again. The losing is like the part that I didn't really like. Getting it was okay. But I think there's shadow stuff there that we can talk about, because how do you go about making $1 million and then losing it all and then making it again? I clearly know how to do it, and then losing it all again. Like, that's not really a good record, is it?
That's a good place to jump in. Look, with the shadow work course, we look at different areas of life, and money and career is one that people are really interested in, because everyone wants to be doing better in terms of their career and money. And so we could just jump in there. I was going to start somewhere else, but I think here's a good place as any.
Very nice.
And so I have talked to other people who said that they can make money, but they can't hold on to it.
Yeah, well, this is clearly my case, isn't it?
It sounds like it. So do you want to give us a little bit of the background, or just the story of how you made your first million and lost it, how you made your second million and lost it, and then maybe what have you learnt about money or your money shadow from that experience?
The first one was construction work. I was a civil engineer, left the big company that I was working for, started a smaller company, worked in... kind of like if you were in Australia, it would be working out in the outback. I was working in the tribal lands where you, as an incentive to go and work there, you didn't have to pay tax. So it's a whole lot easier to make a lot of money there, because they're not taking half of the money you make. And so I made a substantial amount of money there. I had a few jobs running. I had my own airplane. I was flying from job to job, checking on things and so on. And after about 4 or 5 years, I was well set. I had a couple of houses. I had my airplane. But my brother was a musician, and he was really keen to start a band and play music. And he worked with me in the construction. So he convinced me to start learning to play bass guitar. He was an excellent guitarist and vocalist. So I started playing bass guitar, and after about 6 months, we were doing reasonably well, making good music. And I decided this construction thing was a mug's game. You know, I was like 28 years old. I was still single, always out in the bush somewhere, not having much of a social life, no women to meet, and starting to feel the need to settle down, find a lady and have a family and so on. So we decided to just pack up the company, sell it, and I sold off a couple of the houses and bought a whole bunch of music equipment. And I said, okay, we go on the road for 5 years, and we see, like, if you're going to make it in a business, you've got to give it 5 years. We'll treat it as a business, and we'll go and play music for 5 years. So we did, and used up all the money. The band clearly didn't do all that well. But, man, we had a lot of fun.
Wow.
We did have a lot of fun. And by the end of that, most of the money was gone. And so I kind of thought maybe that wasn't the wisest thing, but by then I had met my lady and I'd been married for about a year. So I started again with another business doing low-cost housing for the new Nelson Mandela government in South Africa. We were very successful. We're making hundreds of thousands of houses because the way we did it was we made a system that was easy for people to build, even if they had no skills. And then they'd build their own house, because most of the people who were getting houses on the compensation scheme were people who were unemployed and living in squatter camps. So they were people who had labor capabilities but no cash. So we went in, supplied materials and training, and they built their own houses so they could get a substantially better house for the money that we had than from contractors who are actually building the house and paying their labor. So we did very well. And then government corruption shut us down and we lost all the money again. We went bankrupt overnight because we had hundreds of thousands of houses half built and the government stopped paying while they did an investigation, and the investigation lasted for 5 years. So that's when we decided to move to New Zealand. And because I was making a fresh start, I decided to get into IT work. This was about the late 90s, and I saw the internet was going to be a potentially huge thing. So I taught myself how the internet worked. I taught myself to program. I got pretty smart on security software and cryptography that keeps things safe on the internet. I had some academic background in accountancy, so I started doing payment systems, and then I started getting known, and I started building private stock exchanges and venture capital trading platforms and things like that for Americans, and I made a whole lot of money again, mostly working through the night for American companies. And that was great until 2007. I had pretty much all the money that I had made in the American stock market, and we had moved to Australia, and I pretty much lost a couple of $1 million in 6 weeks when the big crash happened.
2008.
And I made a whole lot of foolish decisions where I didn't just hold on and wait for it to come back. I took what I had out when it had already lost a huge amount. And so there it was, second time, lost all the money. And, or you could almost say 3 times, although with the Nelson Mandela housing, we had not really got to a point where it was really flying before it fell apart. And so, yeah, that left me there, and I decided that I needed to take a different tack in life because, let's face it, I mean, try twice and it's all gone. Maybe I'm not doing something exactly right, you know. And but I had no direction to go. I really didn't know what could happen for me there. You know, it was. I didn't have a clue as to what to really do. So I sort of floated around after that for quite a while, dabbling in different things. By then, my marriage had failed. I think the stresses of losing all the money twice, 3 moves to different countries, etc., just taken its toll, and the marriage wasn't doing well. That was pretty devastating for me as well. So it took me a while, and I was in a pretty dark place for 5, 6, 7 years. And I can honestly say everything I tried was terrible effort. Things didn't come easy for me like they had previously. So I guess eventually I got to the point where I thought, bit of a sidetrack, I even did a financial planning diploma at one stage during that dark time to just see if I could learn about how money works. That was a big mistake because you don't learn anything about how money works as a financial planner. You learn how to sell insurance to people, and to me it's quite a big rip-off, and how to manage the government things like tax and super and all those sort of things. And you just learn all the rules about that. So I didn't really learn anything about looking after money or protecting it. And then later on, I realized, I started realizing that pretty much everything revolves around the law. You know, when you're doing business, no matter what you're doing, it's all about what's legal, what's not. And then I thought about this thing of the fact that we're getting this aging population where there's lots of people who come from a pretty wealthy era, all the baby boomers or whatever we want to call them, retiring, having lots of assets and needing to manage them into their retirement and then for their estate planning. So I thought I'll become a lawyer and I'll do estate planning as a guy who can, it's not a high stress law thing or whatever, you know, and maybe there's going to be really good money there. It should be a growth business, you know, with all these people. So I thought that was a good plan. And I started studying law, but of course you need to get experience to work as a lawyer. So as I was coming to the end of my studies, I managed to get a job, but it just so happened that they weren't doing estate planning at all. They were doing public liability law. And it was, to keep it simple, it was working with people who had really suffered a lot of harm and trauma in their lives, and they were suing institutions. Mm-hmm. And it took its toll on me. I was just I'm not made for dealing with people's traumatic stories 12 hours a day, every day, and then dealing with them on the phone and so on. Yeah. And so I ended up with what they call a psychological injury, where I ended up with major depressive disorder, post-traumatic stress, and acute anxiety. So I was in the darkest place I've probably ever been in my life at that point. And it was, and then the flood came.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
And I lived in a house that had been flooded while I tried to patch it all together. And that wasn't the most pleasant for somebody who was already depressed. And then Quinn, actually, my daughter, suggested that I go to your weekend shadow work workshop. She said, that's what you need. And I was like, well, I don't know what it is, but I'm pretty desperate here. I'm not doing very well at all. I'll have a go. So I went to your shadow work weekend workshop. And, well, I can honestly say, candidly, it was interesting, but it didn't help me all that much. It was, I mean, there was information there that I could see, there's something here.
Yep.
But it just wasn't quite enough to get me to the point where I could use it. It was, and I don't think you intended that it was just a teaser, you know, but that's how it ended up for me. And I did see that other people on that weekend workshop were having quite dramatic results and breakthroughs and so on, but that didn't happen for me. I was like, whoa, what's going on here? What exactly is this? And I went home after that weekend thinking, wow, this shadow work is a thing, but how does it help me? You know, and I didn't notice a lot of change in my life or anything. And I tried to look up stuff on the internet, but it was all, for where I was, in the place I was at that point in time in my life, it was just not making much sense to me.
Sure.
So I was pretty delighted when you announced the 6-week shadow work course, because I thought, well, here's an opportunity to actually find out what this is. My interest had been piqued already during that weekend workshop, and I thought, well, maybe now I can find out what's going on. And I spoke to Quinn again, and Quinn said, yeah, you definitely need to sign up. There's still place on that particular course. Go for it. And so that's how I ended up coming to shadow work. And at that point in time, I was still in a really dark place, still single, still living alone in a pretty flood-damaged house. And, and I've dominated the conversation now, so perhaps...
You are the guest.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for that. So you're no longer in a dark place?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, I can honestly say that 6 weeks, or it was probably more like 8 weeks.
Yeah, 8.
Because I joined up 2 weeks prior to the shadow work course, and as I think you mentioned to us, well, it's going to start now. You know, as soon as you sign up, things start happening, and they did. So they did start happening early, but then they continued afterwards, of course. I mean, I think the course is like, it's like that's the uphill on the roller coaster, and you're going up, up, and then hopefully towards the end of the course, the last couple of weeks, you feel like you're just peeking over the top of that hill as they've taken the carriages all the way up. And after the course finished, it's like that hectic roller coaster ride down. It's just like, I'm out of control here. This stuff is just happening. And that's what I experienced. There was immense shifts that happened after the course. A lot happened during. Yeah. But afterwards, big things happened.
I've actually extended the course. You might be pleased to hear it's now 12 weeks.
12 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay, so they might even experience some of the roller coaster.
They will. That's the whole idea. I did realise that 8 weeks is too short.
Yeah.
And that I've extended it to 12 weeks to allow... And like you say, once you start, you can't unsee your shadow once you see it.
Oh, that's it.
And once you open that Pandora's box, you'll always be looking at yourself in terms of, you know, the light and the dark, and
absolutely
the conscious and the unconscious. And so well, I'm really pleased. I wasn't aware how big an impact it had on you. I know you met a lovely lady during the course, and that you went from being single to in a very satisfying relationship. And I've met your partner, and she's lovely. And so I knew that was one of the things you got out of the course, but I didn't realise it lifted you out of this dark place where you had this major depressive disorder, PTSD, and acute anxiety. And I call that, I've had that kind of trifecta myself. I went through that around 58, and that's I call that the dark night of the soul. when you're in a bad place, in a dark place, and so interesting. So you're in a dark place, and then you do a shadow work course, which is looking in the dark. So you're already in the dark, and then we go looking in that dark, which is the whole idea of shadow work. Most people we're afraid of the dark, and we don't want to go into the uncomfortable and the unknown. Yeah. But that's where a lot of the gold is. And so even though you're in a dark place, you thought, I'll go do a shadow work course and go into that dark voluntarily.
Yeah, well, I can add to that. You don't know how to look into that dark place when you're in that dark place. You're kind of like stuck. I was really stuck. I mean, I didn't know. I wasn't afraid to look there. I was there. I was stuck. I didn't know how to climb out of the hole I was in.
Yeah. So let's backpedal a little bit. I want to go back to just, we'll get to the moral injury, the psychological injury thing when you were working. But the bit I want to just touch on, it was, so you made your first million, you buy a bunch of music equipment, you and your brother get on the road, and you go through $1 million, or in
over 5 years, yeah.
Over 5 years.
Yeah.
So a 5-year road trip of music, blowing through $1 million. That must have been the time of your life. I can't imagine that not having fond memories of that.
Super fun, super fun. You must know that he was married at the time.
Okay.
And there were always friends, hangers on, whatever. So we were pretty much traveling in a combi with a massive trailer with all our equipment, and generally between 5 and 8 people in the combi supporting the whole gig the whole time. So you can burn through money pretty quick.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And there were a few drugs and things as well that aren't cheap.
I would imagine there would have been.
So, yeah.
So we'll fast forward a bit now. And so you're working for a law firm. And you, part of your job is to talk to people for long periods of time about traumatic experiences in terms of, their insurance claims based on public liability. Yeah. And you said you're not cut out for that. That's not, you're temperamentally, it's difficult for you to listen to people recount their trauma.
Yeah, well, maybe I can be a little bit more direct. I was in a department that dealt only with what they call institutional abuse, which was literally violent sexual abuse of young children.
Oh, okay.
So, and I was reading their stories or talking to these very people for the majority of my day, every day. And there are safeguards in place in the industry that are accepted so that one doesn't work excessively in that kind of environment without breaks and without a certain amount of counseling and so on. None of which was put in place for me or for anybody else in the office, because the floodgates opened after the Royal Commission when they changed the rules and said that you don't have to put in a complaint within 5 years of being abused, which is ridiculous because most children don't know they've been abused until they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s. So they changed that rule and the floodgates opened. And so we were overrun with claims. So we were overworked. We had no way of keeping up, understaffed, and also dealing with this nasty stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And it was just too much for me. And in fact, it was too much for pretty much everybody in the office. And they ended up closing down the office because everybody was off on sick leave.
I have a friend who's an ex-magistrate, and he had PTSD. Part of his job too, it may even been the same cohort of people he was working with, but he was working with victims of pedophilia and child sexual abuse. And he developed PTSD. He managed to treat his quite effectively using EMDR, the eye movement desensitization process. There's different ways of treating PTSD. And so how long was it from start? So you started that job working with that cohort of victims, and how long was it before you recognised that you had this psychological injury? Was it a year, 2 years?
18 months.
18 months, yeah. It wouldn't take long listening to that kind of... I'm part of what I've been doing for the last 15 years is working as a trauma counsellor or trauma therapist, and listening to people's stories, a lot of it abuse, sexual assault, war trauma, first responder trauma, these kind of things. And I guess for some reason I probably temperamentally am maybe a bit more cut out for it than the average person, because I've had quite a lot of longevity in that. There was a point when I was doing 3 or 4 6-hour sessions a week, and that became too much. And so I cut it right back. But I have listened to tens of thousands of hours of people recounting their trauma, and it does take a toll.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's go. We were going to talk about money shadow, and then we got into trauma. Let me just finish that part of the conversation. So it was through listening to trauma. So you did it for 18 months. I did it for 15 years. Why I'm glad I stuck with it is because it's what catapulted me onto this new direction that I'm on now, which is shadow work. So that's how I got to become fascinated about shadow work, just listening to trauma. And I asked myself the question, at some point, because I could see the generational trauma and the cycle being passed down through the family line. And there's this conversation that hurt people. And I just asked myself, why do hurt people keep hurting people, and what's going on? What's behind all this? And it just occurred to me that it's because, my father hurt me, my mother hurt me, and they were hurt by their parents. So I see it even in my own family dynamic. And I think it's that, if individuals did their shadow work, they're less likely to pass that trauma on. And so it got me looking at what's behind the cycle of trauma is the unintegrated shadow. And I'm convinced that that's correct. And so I switched from being a trauma therapist into being a shadow work coach. And that's my focus now, and probably will be for the next decade. Because I'm convinced that if individuals do their shadow work, they're less likely to pass their trauma on. I'll just give an anecdote to that. So I'm 62, never married, no children. And the reason never married, no children is because of my family of origin history. Both my parents had problems with alcohol, and they were both quite physically abusive to me and my siblings. And so I remember from a young age making a decision that, marriage and children's not for me. If that's what it's like. It was really quite a chaotic household that I grew up in. And so I made a choice, no marriage, no children for me.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and just because of the trauma. And now, I'm 62 and I'm in a committed relationship and actually going to be starting a family. My partner's pregnant and I'll become a father this year at the age of 63.
Yeah, congrats on that.
Yeah, thank you. And so the only way I could get from not being a husband and father or in a committed relationship to where I am now is through my shadow work. I had to do my trauma work first, but then after the trauma work, I still needed to confront the shadow. And when people come to me for shadow work coaching, quite often they've done therapy, they've done meditation, they've done yoga, they've done breath work, they've done everything they can, and they still have to confront their shadow. So you don't have to. The shadow is always waiting for you if you want to discover it, I guess is a better way of saying it. Okay, so let's see if we can talk about money shadow and see if we can identify what might have been going on for you in money shadow, and have you identified, so the shadow is just things that you don't know or your blind spots or hidden aspects of it. So looking back, so if I look at those, the first one I can see that you chose that, the second one with the government being corrupt, that happened to you, and the third one was the 2008 crash. So the second two big losses that you had there were kind of environmental or outside your control, but then the first one I can see that you were wanting a social life, you were working out in the bush, it was isolated, you're a single guy, you're 28, you're like, I need to get on with things, and then your brother invited you, and then you blew through this money. So what's shadow about that in terms of money or career, or what can you see now that you couldn't see then?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. First, I would probably just comment on how you categorize those. The first one I chose, and then the other two were out of my control. My philosophy of life doesn't agree with that.
Okay.
My philosophy of life would say those happened because my vibration, my shadow, whatever you want to call it, was at that level where that is what I chose. Because by all means, I could have been able to foresee those happenings and defend against them if my vibration had been right, and if my attitude or I didn't have the shadow. I feel like I would have been able to protect the business from the government corruption by operating in a different way if I had been able to, because other businesses survived. And likewise with the big crash, I mean, really it was pretty irresponsible to have everything loaded up in the most volatile shares that make the most money but also lose the most. I didn't have blue chip shares and a proper portfolio, I was gung-ho. It was kind of like easy come, easy go, this money for me, always. It was always just easy come, easy go. So, I can make it so easily. Why do I need to take care of it? Yeah, I can get it again if I need to.
Right.
And yet, once it's gone, it hurts. And there's that big job of making it again, because although I know how to, money doesn't actually come easy. You really got to actually put yourself out to make money. You need to put in the hard yards. And sure, you need to know what you're doing to a certain extent, but it boils down to really making some sacrifices so that you do the amount of work required to make a reasonable amount of money. Later on, it should be able to look after you. So it's worth, I think, front-running that big effort to create something, but then I just didn't have the something that I had created afterwards. So, but anyway, sorry to interrupt, but that's how I see it. So I think that my choice in the first place was probably driven by not so much a money shadow, but more of a relationship thing. Already it was the relationship shadow coming in, like, you must have a family and a woman to make your life worthwhile. My family background is a Christian missionary family, very staunch framework of what was acceptable, what's right and what's wrong, and how you do relationships and how you do life, you know. It was like you get married once for life. There is no such thing as divorce. It was like you choose your partner carefully, and then you have children, and you work through the problems, and, you know, it was this whole thing. And that has its own serious repercussions, I can tell you, that I've experienced in my life. But I think at that point in time, it was, my brother was married. He was having a great time with his wife, and everything seemed to be good. And he's younger than me by a couple of years, and I was like, wow, I'm missing out here. I've got money now. I know how to make money. We can go and have some fun, play the band. Maybe we get successful and become multi-millionaire rock stars anyway, so let's go and do it. So that was kind of the attitude at that point in time. And I was sick and tired of construction because it's hard.
Yes. I imagine it would have been, especially out there in the tribal lands.
Yeah, out there and working 12, 14 hours a day. And
yeah, I take your point that to make money, it takes some sweat.
Yeah.
So when I talk about money, Shadow, one of the things I look at is that we all have a money story, whether we're aware of it or not. You may have more than one money story. And sometimes those stories are unconscious, or you're unaware of what your money story might be until you go looking for it. I've recently uncovered some more of my money story, which is interesting, that I'm working through at the moment. So you mentioned at some point you have this attitude, or you had this attitude of easy come, easy go.
Yeah, I think that was my attitude, but I don't think that's my money story. If I think carefully about it, my dad was a Christian missionary and a school teacher. And he did it hard, you know. I can remember when we were kids, at the end of each month when my dad was getting his salary, they used to pay them monthly there. Him and my mom would be in the bedroom with all the bills and accounts laid out on the bed, deciding how much they were going to pay on each of these just to keep the wolf from the door. Like, if we pay these guys this much, would that be enough for them not to come after us this month? And it was always like, if you need new shoes or new something, we'll try and get some hand-me-downs, or we can't quite afford them this month, maybe next month, that sort of thing. So I guess I came from that, and then as a young engineer, I earned a lot of money almost right from the start. Even while I was a student, I was sponsored by a big construction company. And they paid me while I was a student, and I was earning almost as much as my dad had been earning his whole life, you know, as a young engineer. And I think I kind of felt in a way that I didn't deserve this. Like, my dad did it so hard, and I haven't done the hard yards, and I don't deserve to have so much money. And I think that was the story. And so when I had all this money, it was like, well, you've got this, spend it now while you've got it, because you don't actually deserve to have it, and it could be gone anytime.
Is that something you were aware of back then, or that you're aware of now?
I'm aware of it now, looking back, but at the time...
So your money shadow would have been, I don't deserve this.
Yeah,
that would have been what would have been hidden from you.
Hidden from me at the time.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because I call that a self-limiting belief. You know, I don't deserve this. It's a belief system that you have. It's limiting because it's going to limit how much money you can hold.
Yeah.
And it's unconscious. So you've got this unconscious self-limiting belief around money, is that I don't deserve this. And our unconscious beliefs can shape our choices and decisions without us being aware of it at all.
Yeah, and that's what I think happened on both of those situations where you say, well, they were out of my control. I think definitely they were probably within my control if I didn't have that that shadow that I didn't deserve it.
Yeah. Well, that's I think that just kind of came up. That just I think we discovered it. It was quite easy how that surfaced.
Well, I have considered it since I did the shadow work course. I looked at that because I was like, I need to go back there and see what's going on, because I don't want that to happen again in my future.
So now, what's your new money story? Do you deserve money? If you make money, do you deserve it now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you've reframed or rewritten that old belief.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I now realize that was a very mistaken belief, and that I did do a lot of hard work to achieve that.
Yeah.
And I now find myself ready to put in the kind of work that I need to do to establish myself again financially for my old age or whatever, if I ever do get old. So I can sort that out, and I don't have the hesitation or the I can't say it was a fear, but there was definitely some kind of trepidation about having a go again, because what's the point? I'm just going to lose it again. But that's gone. Yeah. That's gone. And I actually I feel very positive about projects that I'm working on at the moment and things that I can do in the future that'll take me into my twilight years and not be a burden on my family and live well.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah, clearly you're not someone who's afraid of hard work or putting the effort in. I mean, you studied law, you worked as a law clerk, you're an engineer, you went and started a band, you're a bone therapist, and all the other things you've done. And so certainly you do deserve it. But because you were probably comparing yourself to your father's and mother's plight of being missionaries, and that's it, like our childhood just shapes, that's where those stories come from. I'll sort of share a little bit of my, where my money story came from.
Yeah.
I think my first experience of money that I recall was when I was in first grade at school, and we went to a Catholic convent school, and me and my two older brothers, and we would walk to school. It was about a mile away, and we'd be given, it was probably $1 back then, could have been less, to take to school to buy our lunch with. And so I'd buy my lunch at lunchtime, and there was always money left over, some change. And right after lunch, in the classroom, so in my classroom there was pictures of starving African children on the walls, mission kind of things. Yeah, you would be familiar with that. Yeah. And so, the box got passed around, and, you were encouraged to put any money you had left over to give that to the missions, to the starving children.
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize it at the time, but that was my very first experience of money. And what I learnt about money then, that I only realised, within the last couple of years, when I started looking at my money story, was that any money over and above what I need, I give away.
Right.
And I've been doing that my whole life.
Very generous of you, Pete.
Yeah, overly generous, and plenty of people have done very well for me. I think I've given away about 5 cars. Rather than sell them, I'll just give them to someone who needs a car. I've given away tens of thousands of dollars. I've blown through quite a bit of money, like you and your brother did when you went on the road, just because it's a similar thing. Like, if it's more than I need, then it needs to go to someone else. And so I've never really had more than I need, because this story that I had that formed with my first experience of money is that, and that shaped me. And so I've had to rewrite that. And now I'm okay with that. I'm entitled to have and hold more money than I need.
And still give away some if you want to.
Yeah, but I'd like to know what it is to have more money than I need. Right. And then if I've got more money than I need, then what can I do with that money? Because maybe you can do good things with that money. Maybe it's not all about, buying a Ferrari or something. I don't know what I would do if I had excess money that was a significant amount. I'd like to think I'd do something for the community that inspired me. So it wouldn't necessarily be all about me, but I've never got to that point where I've had more than I need, because I give it away. Yeah. So then there's a second part of this. There's a second part of my money story. So this, now fast forward to, I'm probably about 10, and I have Italian grandparents, or I did, that they've passed on. And we would go to my Italian grandparents every Sunday for lunch, family lunch. And my grandfather, my nonno, didn't speak English, very hard-working man, and quite a generous man as well. And so we would show up as a family. There were seven siblings in my family. And so my older brother would walk up, and my grandfather would call him over. He'd put his hand in his pocket, and he'd pull out some money, and he'd walk off with it. And then my next brother, Rocky, would go up, and he would do the same. Then my sister, younger than me, would go up and she would get a little handshake, and then my younger brother, and then he'd call me over. And then, I would get a little handshake. And then we'd walk off in the room and go, how much did you get? How much did you get? And everyone was getting like $20. And I looked and I'd get $5.
Yeah, well, that's all you deserved, Pete.
Well, clearly. It was actually something close. And so there was a reason. Like I've worked out this reason myself. It may not be the reason, but this is what I think it was. So my oldest brother, Phil, if you're the firstborn in an Italian family and you're a boy, you can do no wrong. You're like a prince.
Right.
So you've got status.
Yeah.
So he had status just for being the firstborn. My second brother, my second oldest, Rocky, was named after my grandfather, Rocco. Mm-hmm. So he was named after the guy dishing out the money. So he got some status too. My sister, younger than me, Francesca, was named after my grandmother. So she had status. And then
she was the princess.
Well, yeah, that's right. The oldest daughter named after the grandmother. And then the next brother, Joseph, was named after my father. So then I'm thinking, who was I named after? So I was named after my mother's, who's Australian, brother, who was a jockey, a bit of a womanizer, gambler, used to fix horse races, just a real rat bag, bit of a scoundrel. Lovely guy.
Yeah.
But, lived a very colourful life. And I was named after him. So I guess I was on the outer in terms of that.
Yeah,
But that's what I made it mean. I don't know, it could have been something else. But my money story that I got from that was that I don't get to have my share. Everyone else gets a bigger share of the pie.
Right.
How could I think anything else? So there's two money stories that formed quite young in my childhood. One is that if I've got more than I need, I have to give it away, and I'm not entitled to my share. Everyone else gets a bigger share than me. And that's been playing out still, 4 decades later.
Wow.
And I've really started to hone in on this. There's another money story, but it's not about me. You're the guest. So I just wanted to share that because it's part of the work we do. When we do shadow work is we look at, how come I'm not doing better with my finances and with my career? Well, a lot of those choices and decisions are being made by unconscious belief systems that formed when we were young.
Right.
Cool. Okay, so let's leave money alone for now.
Yeah, we've
covered it. So another aspect of shadow work, which I think you and I have both had some success in, is in how shadow work can improve your intimate relationships. And I've been single a lot of my life. I think there was one period there of about 10 years where I wasn't in a relationship. I've had short-term mating strategies. I never really committed. And so for that reason, I probably wasn't a good catch. Women probably didn't see me as a good catch because this guy is not willing to commit. And it was through doing shadow work that I uncovered who I was in terms of relationship. And I didn't like a lot of who I was in relationship. I started to see what was going on. And through doing my shadow work, I learned that I did have a problem with commitment. My mother, God bless her, was trying to tell me this, my whole life. You just got a problem with commitment. And I'd say, no, I don't. No, I don't. Yeah, you've got a problem with commitment. No, I don't. Yes, you do. Yeah. And finally, she was right. I had a problem with commitment.
Right.
And about 4 years ago, after doing a lot of deep shadow work, I recognised, how I show up in relationship, and I decided that I was going to end up single for the rest of my life unless I committed. And so I'm now in a committed relationship, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be a father, and so none of those things would have happened if I hadn't done shadow work. So shadow work for me got me from being a serial kind of, dater to being in a, content and happy relationship that's committed and that's producing a family. So I want to just hear from you, if you don't mind sharing, because I know you had some success in your relationship life through doing the shadow work course. Can you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, can you share about that?
Turning point. Do you want a bit of history?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've got plenty of time.
We've got plenty of time still. We haven't used it all up yet. Okay, so as a young man, I had I was never much of a womanizer or anything like that. You know, I was coming from a Christian missionary home. It was kind of like one girl, full loyalty thing, you know. And I really met my first proper girlfriend when I was 20 at uni. And we ended up being together for 8 years. And in the last 18 months of that relationship, we were actually engaged to be married. But by then I was a qualified young engineer, and I was obviously with civil engineering, you're building roads, bridges, things like that. You can't sort of go into the office every day to build it. You have to go to where it needs to be built. And so I was away from home most of the time. I would probably be back every second weekend. Get back on late Friday night, leave on Sunday afternoon to get back to work on late Sunday night and ready to start work Monday morning. And obviously that puts a fair amount of pressure on a relationship, but I feel like perhaps I was saved from disaster anyway, because we were about 3 or 4 months out from when the wedding was due to happen when she got pregnant and confessed to me that it wasn't my child.
Oh.
So that was obviously the end of that. And she ended up marrying that guy, and as far as I know, she might still be married to him now. Last I checked, a few years ago, she actually contacted me during some certain family event, and she was still married to him with 3 daughters. So obviously that worked well for her.
Yeah.
That didn't work very well for me. And then I went on that, from about that point, that was where I started working out in the far distant lands, doing my construction company and not meeting women at all until I was in my early 30s, probably 31, 32. And I was observing marriages and relationships amongst various of my friends or colleagues, people around my age group. And I wasn't too impressed about what I was seeing. You know, I was like, these guys are battling a bit, or the women are battling, or the relationships. I'd already seen one of my friends who got married when he was 27, and by the age of 32, they were divorced. And I was like, this looks like a bit of it's a bit of a nightmare, this whole relationship thing. So I'd kind of, after I did the band thing, I thought, well, this is much more fun just being single and doing the dating thing and just having fun. And I'd kind of decided I'm not going to do the actual marriage relationship thing. It's just not going to work for me. Obviously I had a pretty powerful shadow that relationships could not be a happy, enjoyable, continuous event life kind of thing. It was going to be the beginning of a miserable existence that went through different levels of misery with the odd pleasant time in between. That was kind of my attitude. So, hey, let's not just do that. In fact, one of my favorite sayings was, why make one woman miserable when I can make a whole lot of women happy? So while I was dating, maybe that was a little bit egotistical now that I think about it, but whatever. So I had kind of decided that was the case, but
that decision, that what I would call that part of a shadow. When you make a decision like that, that then goes into, you park that in your unconscious, and then you're living from that story.
Absolutely. And I had already made that decision that relationships were a pathway to misery, really.
Right.
But then the universe had different plans for me, I think, because then I met my ex-wife when I was 34 or 35. She was a widow with two children, and from where I stood, it seemed impossible that we wouldn't be together. And it was almost like when I met her, it was just, I knew this is now going to be my partner and my wife, and that was it. And it appeared that she felt much the same way, and we were married within 6 months.
Wow.
So it was pretty quick. And then I married her. I adopted the boys, and then we had 2 more children. So we ended up with 4 kids. And that was great. I loved having the 4 kids. Of course, my attitude towards relationships didn't create the best possible marriage, and we ended up with exactly what I said relationships would be, and that was a constant rocky road of hills and valleys with the odd good time in between, but a lot of misery and pain and suffering in between, and I know now that we create that, we create that. That was where I was, and so that's why when I looked around and saw relationships, that's what I saw, because that's what my shadow was saying relationships were. So that's what I saw all around me. That's what I created in my relationship, and so that ended about 12 years ago now, and probably 9 or 10 years before I did the shadow work course. And I can honestly say for the first 5 years after that relationship ended, I had absolutely no interest in going anywhere near another woman in a relationship capacity. That was just a no-go zone. I was like, I'm done with this stuff now.
So that's you, and you made a decision that
Yeah.
I'm done. I've heard other people say this, other men in particular, but I'm sure women do it too.
Yeah.
If you have a few experiences that leave you, jaded or hurt or whatever, you could easily make that declaration, I'm done.
Yeah, that's it. I'm done. It's not worth the pain for the few segments of joy that you get in between, sort of thing. The payoff wasn't adequate for me to see that was a decent decision to get into a relationship again.
Yeah.
And so I went on like that. And my kids would point out to me my shortcomings in my thinking and so on, but I couldn't see it.
Yes.
I'm stuck in this shadow world here of mine. And then I would say that after possibly a year before I did the long shadow work course, so maybe after the weekend one, I started to feel like maybe there's a possibility that I can think about a relationship. I dabbled with a bit of dating, and no, it wasn't. I wasn't choosing the right ones, or I was just not getting it right at all.
Do you think that had anything to do with your headspace as to what you were attracting? Yes.
Yeah, I was.
Yes, sure.
I was just absolutely not getting it right at
Yes.
all. And I can't say that they weren't possibly wonderful partners if I had been on a good level, but my level, I was not connecting with the kind of person. In fact, I doubt if there was a possibility that I was capable of having a healthy relationship at that point anyway. So it didn't matter who she was. It was going to be wrong.
Right.
Because I was not capable.
Yes.
I was not good. And so I had been dabbling with the thought, and then one day I had a very, very interesting conversation with Quinn, and she basically laid it out for me, and I don't think I'd ever heard things laid out in quite the same way. And I think this happened somewhere in the middle of me doing the shadow work course, the long shadow work course. And we were talking about the possibility of relationships, and I'd been saying that I think I might be ready to get into a relationship. And she had been telling me, if you're not ready, she's not going to show up.
Wow.
Until you are ready and until you are sorted, she's not going to be there. You're not going to. So don't waste your time going and looking out there. Look at yourself and sort yourself out,
Wow.
And that was pretty solid, And I was like, I think I'm good. And she's like, no, you're not. She's very capable of calling me out, She basically said to me one day, when you can walk into the house where mom is, that's my ex, or do anything with mom and not get triggered, then maybe you're ready. And I was like, yeah, I think I can do that. She's like, no, you can't. No, you can't. What about this last week? Or what about that? What about that? And it was clear. I was still getting very triggered, although I felt like I've got control. I wasn't losing it. I was totally getting triggered. And there was a whole lot of stuff still going on. So Quinn laid that out for me, and I was like, okay, now I've just had a few good smacks and I've been slapped down, and
by your daughter.
Go sort yourself out.
By your daughter. Quinn's your daughter, yeah.
Yeah, she's possibly my strongest mentor.
Yes.
You know,
right.
She teaches me as much as maybe I can teach her. I don't know, but you know, there's a wisdom in youth, and Quinn especially is an extremely wise person. So I listen to her very carefully when she speaks, because there's a lot of wisdom that comes. And one part of that conversation was, she said to me, do you have a soulmate? And I said, well, I don't know. How would I know? And she's like, no, you know. Everybody knows if they've got a soulmate in this world or not. If you sit and think about it and really contemplate on that, you will know. You can feel if you've got a soulmate or not. So, do you have a soulmate? And we were at a restaurant, I think, for a dinner together, and I said, well, look, I can't tell you right now, but I'm definitely going to contemplate on that. And then she continued to tell me about a hierarchy of the quality of relationships that one can have. So then one can have the superficial sort of broken relationship that's codependent and two unconscious people just together for convenience or for physical attraction or whatever it may be. And for some people, that's okay. She made it clear that for all of these levels, for some people it was okay, as long as they were okay with that. But if they wanted more, that relationship wasn't going to be okay for them. And then the next level was where you got two functional people who weren't particularly conscious, but they functional. They fairly authentic. They know themselves. They like each other. It's suitable for them to be together. It works financially and on a physical level and everything. So they can have a really good relationship and they can have a good life together at that level. And then you'll get a conscious relationship where you've got two people who are not only functional but conscious as well. And so their relationship, instead of being existing in a happy relationship that continues well for their life and can be a happy and solid relationship, they're going to actually experience growth from their relationship. Because they're conscious, they're going to experience growth in each other, and together as a unit, they're going to be much more than their individual parts. And obviously that's something that you would strive for greater than the previous. But then on top of that is the soulmate relationship, where you have all of that from the previous, but you are soulmates as well. So there's just a spiritual knowing that you are meant to be together, and it's all working, and it's a growth experience, it's a spiritual experience, and so on. And so I took this away, and I thought, this is a really nice way of looking at things, you know, and it's a good way to assess your target for where you want to sort of land with your relationship. So I went away and I had the good consideration and contemplation, and I came up with, yep, I do have a soulmate. I feel like my whole life I've been searching for a soulmate. I've always felt like everything I'm doing in my life feels incomplete if I'm not doing it with somebody and for somebody. And for a long time, I felt almost satisfied in that while I was having small children and a wife, and my work was being done not for me, but for us. as a family unit, and I was doing this to support my family and so on. But it wasn't that peak of soulmate thing. Obviously, I mean, our relationship was pretty rocky at times. But I had a level of that kind of thing, and I was like, I really feel like my life is not one. It's not that I need that to be feeling like a complete person, but I feel like to really form my life in a way that is complete and totally satisfying spiritually and consciously, it can't really happen without a soulmate in that equation. And I came to that realization within probably a week or so after that conversation. And then I continued through the shadow work course with you and focused a lot on the relationship aspects of shadow. And we were very fortunate in that group that there were a number of women who were pretty vocal about their attitudes towards their relationships and what was going on for them. And quite honestly, a lot of what they said revealed shadow to me that I couldn't see in myself. But once they were capable of saying what they said, I was suddenly like, spark, okay, now I see this in me. And it wasn't necessarily exactly what they were talking about of them, but it was something that triggered something that revealed to me what was going on in me.
Yes.
And I think that I also had a fair bit to say and that helped them. And so we kind of like got on this sort of expand. Oh, I keep bumping the microphone. Sorry about that. This expanding sort of spiral of growth where we were instigating each other to go further and deeper in our self-discovery. And that was incredibly valuable. So on your courses, those group calls are unbelievably powerful tools to help us find shadow that we can't find by ourselves. I mean, we've got the journaling, we've got the videos, we've got all those things, but the group call is where the real power comes, because even if you have, I mean, and there were many times we had quite a full course. I didn't get a lot of time to speak, but the amount I got from the group call, just hearing the others and what they were going through and your coaching for them was massive for me. And I had huge growth during that time. And I started to come to terms with who I was and started realizing where some of my relationship shadow lay. And there were a few things. It wasn't just one thing. There was a lot.
Do you remember some of them? Do you want to share any of them? Or like, what were some of your shadow relationship aspects?
So, I mean, clearly the one that came out was that relationships are dangerous. Relationships are dangerous. You get in there, you're going to lose something. You're going to lose your life. You're going to lose your freedom. You're going to lose, there's a whole lot of stuff you're going to lose. And you've got to weigh up, are all of those losses worth what you're going to get? And it's dangerous because when you meet somebody, you don't know what they're actually going to give and what they're going to come with. So I know I'm going to lose all this stuff, but what am I going to get in return? I mean, there's a gamble there, you know? And so there was that big thing. And after the discussions in the shadow work, I realized that actually that's not an equation at all. That's absolutely not how it works at all.
It's something you made up.
Yeah, you give in a relationship, and that's all you have to do. There's no losing anything. You just join in and authentically give what you can, and you will receive in kind, whatever. But as long as you're a happy, authentic person in your own life, you carry on living your life, and it's just enhanced by that extra person in your life. There's nothing that you've lost. All you've done is gain. And so I realized that. And that was a massive breakthrough for me, because I was suddenly like, oh, okay. And then I came to the realization that if I know that I've got a soulmate out there, she's out there and she knows that I'm around too. And the universe knows. And so I don't really have to look.
Or do anything.
I just have to keep myself ready and be open, and it will reveal itself. It'll be there. It'll happen. And I did do a little exercise. I'm not sure if you mentioned it on the shadow work course or not, but I made a list of the attributes.
Yeah, it was one of the exercises.
Of the person that I would like to have a relationship with and that I thought my soulmate would be. And I kept it as simple as I could, and it was still like 2 pages, you know, but I made sure that nothing in there contradicted anything else in there. And I made sure that it was things that were really valuable to me, not just throwaway stuff. And I started looking at that, and every day I would cross things out or change them over a few weeks until I eventually honed it down to what it was. And then I'd look at it probably not even every day, but every couple of days. And another thing that Quinn pointed out to me is, okay, you've got your list now, but are you
those things
meeting those things? Are you actually showing up? Because if you're not showing up those things, how can you ask for those things? You're not going to get it because you don't deserve it until you can show up the same. And so then I started focusing on, am I that, and showing up. And I felt my vibration just changing, and people were starting to relate to me in a different way. People were stopping me and saying like, wow, dude, what have you been doing? You know, what are you on? You know, you're looking pretty good at the moment. And this was probably the week or 2 after I finished the shadow work, and this roller coaster thing was happening. And I had a time when that I had to go and visit my ex, and I just didn't get triggered at all. So I did get triggered some other times after that, so it wasn't completely gone, but the other times I managed to manage the trigger well and not react, not escalate. So that was good. So I started to see, wow, things are changing here, you know, things are good. And I was just now at the point where I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm just waiting for her to show up. And I can tell you an amazing story, actually. The one day I went to the beach. I had been making it a habit to go to the beach every morning pretty early, watch the sunrise sometimes, go for breath work and ice sometimes, and just meditate on the beach, whatever. And the one day I went to the beach, actually I went to the market, and I met a person there that I had never met before, but we had been communicating on some social media about things that we were both interested in. It wasn't a romantic connection, and we decided to go for a walk on the beach a bit later than I normally would. It was like 9:30 or 10 after I'd been at the market on Friday. And I was like, okay, well, we'll go on a walk on the beach and have a chat. And so we went down to the beach and had a chat. She had her dog with her. And when we had finished walking back, and at Bruns, you walk past the Lifesavers Tower, and there's the shower there. As we walked past, I saw a lady showering at the shower, just from the back. I was like, wow, that's interesting, as we do as guys sometimes, but there was more to it. It was like, wow, that's interesting, but I could only see the back of her as we were walking towards the shower. And then as we were walking towards there to give the dog a drink of water, and as I was going to go for a shower as well, that lady just walked off towards the car park. And as she walked off, I was like, oh, that's an interesting one. But I hadn't seen her. I didn't know her. I didn't know who she was. And I stopped, and we gave the dog some water and so on. And in the back of my mind, I was like, wow, I wonder who that was, you know. Never seen her here before, but this is not a time that I usually come to the beach. And then we walked over to my car, and I was still with this other lady and her dog, and just chatting and getting ready to say goodbye to her. And I looked across the car park, and I could see that same lady who had been at the shower with her back to me, talking to another lady. And honestly, it was like something came over me. I didn't even think. I just started walking towards her. And as I was walking, I was kind of like, what am I doing here? You know, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? I was like, oh, what's happening here? You know, but I was walking and I thought, okay, I'll just walk past them and I'll sort of glance at them and say, good morning, and just see what this lady looks like, because I've only seen the back, you know. And so I was walking just close by past them, and the lady that she was talking to was obviously facing me, and she started looking at me like, why are you walking towards us, perhaps, or something. But that prompted the lady that I was interested in to turn around to see what her friend was looking at. And by then I was maybe 1.5 meters away. She looked at me and she's like, hello, stranger. And I was like, I had the cogwheel spinning in my head, like, who is this? She obviously knows me. And I didn't immediately recognize her, but then I recognized her as somebody that I'd met 2 years ago and had seen like 3 or 4 times, and in fact tried to text her a few times to try and make a connection, and even had a coffee with her one time when I met her in town, and tried to make a connection. I'd been interested in her then.
But you weren't ready.
I wasn't ready, and she definitely didn't even see me then, because she knew who I was, but she had absolutely no interest in me whatsoever. She couldn't remember the time we had coffee together.
Right.
She couldn't remember any of that. But when I saw her there, she was like, hello, stranger. I thought you were overseas, because at the time I think I had mentioned the previous time that I might be going overseas. And so we had like just a 2-minute chat, and she's like, I said, look, I haven't seen you for a long time. I'm going to text you and let's get together again, have a good chat, you know. And she's like, yeah, okay, that sounds good. And then she went off with her friend, and by now the other lady that I was with had sort of come up like, what the hell's going on here, you know? And so I introduced them, and then we left, and I left and went home and contacted the lady another week later because she was going camping then. And we got together for a walk, and we literally saw each other every day after that, and that was it.
Yeah.
So I had met her 2 years before, and it was not going to happen. She couldn't even remember that. And now she's my partner, and it's nearly a year. Yeah. And it's just awesome.
It's wonderful. Yeah, I see you guys at the market regularly, and I can tell it's a beautiful relationship. And
yeah, and it's just amazing, because we knew each other. But I had always had a bit of an interest, but it absolutely wasn't going to work for her.
Relationships were still dangerous for you back then.
Yeah, and she has... Obviously, we've discussed that, and she also wasn't ready.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right.
At the time, so...
Yeah. 2 stars collided in the universe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's certainly aspects of that story I can see where your mindset was that you were unlikely to attract, you know, a life partner. And it's been my experience too. So my relationship before my current relationship ended, and I was single for 5 years after that previous relationship. And I thought I'd put everything into the previous relationship. I was all in. At least that was what I told myself. I was fully committed. And then the woman, my partner, still left. And I was, you know, somewhat gutted or devastated. I thought, well, I've got nothing else to give. And if that can't hold a relationship, then must be something about me, something defective in me or something. And I remember I was only 5 years later that I realised I did this, because it's an unconscious thing that we do. So when that relationship broke up, I told myself, women aren't worth it. I don't remember saying that.
So that's similar to what I was saying. Like there's a payoff, and the payoff is not worth it.
So yeah, women aren't worth it. And the other thing I decided was that I suck at relationship. So I didn't know that I'd decided that when that relationship had ended. I just knew that I was gutted and devastated. And so I was single for 5 years. And I'm like, why? And by this time I'm like 58. I'm like, well, I'm just going to end up being single for the rest of my life. And it was through doing my own shadow work, and I didn't really have a guide for shadow work. I was just kind of self-taught. I read all Jung's books, and I was using psychedelics at the time to help uncover my shadow aspects, and reading and just doing contemplation and self-examination and exploration and meditation. And I'm like, why? I must have some story running about women. So then I asked myself, well, what is my story about women, and what's my story about relationships? I actually asked myself that question, and that's when the answers appeared, and I saw that I'd made that decision that women aren't worth it and that I suck at relationship. I'm like, no wonder women are staying away from me, because they can pick up on that. Like, women are very intuitive. The men are too. But if I'm walking around with a belief that women aren't worth it and that I suck at relationship, every woman within 100 yards is going to feel that from me. And so when I recognised I had these self-limiting beliefs, unconscious programs, stories that I'd made up running in the background, the moment I recognised I need to change those two stories. And I did it just like that. And it doesn't take anything to reframe your stories, because you created them in the first place. I created those stories in the first place. So I need to change those two stories. And I just went, women are totally worth it, and I'm awesome in relationship. And I just changed those programs in the moment. It was a month later that my current partner walked in the door.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was that thing about being ready. And I wasn't ready until I identified these unconscious stories that were limiting what was available to me, limiting what was possible. That's why I call them self-limiting beliefs. So, and I'm in a very successful relationship that works. We're both happy. It's been, a wonderful ride. We're committed, and we're even going to start a family. And so quite a lot has become possible for me through doing the shadow work. And I also hear that in your stories as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I can honestly say it was like almost, because, I was having that psychological trauma as well up to that point. I can say it had abated to a certain amount, because these things come in waves, and I was getting a lot of sort of support from friends and so on. I had had the opportunity to go sailing for 6 months with a friend, which was very healing. But honestly, doing the shadow work course was almost like turning a light on. For me, my life went from dark to light during that period of time. And it's been light ever since.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously things still come up.
Yeah.
But we recognize them now. You've given me the tools to notice when the shadow starts playing a part, when that those stories or those sort of false beliefs or whatever, self-limiting beliefs or whatever, when they start to show up, we recognize them with the tools that you've given us in that course, and so we can handle them. And we can make changes. It takes a certain amount of effort. It doesn't just happen. But it gets easier and easier, because you just feel the benefits. So you're like, well, I'm going to do this because it's going to make me better in the long run, and I'm not going to have to suffer the consequences of this thing anymore. So the payoff is great.
When you've got your eye on your shadow, it's no longer running the show and making a mess of your life. Because you've got your eye on it.
It can, but you have the tools to beat it down again.
So I heard Jordan Peterson once talking about his relationship with his wife, and he mentioned that he sees his partner, or who they are for each other, he calls them beneficial adversaries. So I thought about that, and I thought, that's kind of how my relationship is with my partner. So it is somewhat adversarial, a relationship, an intimate relationship, and that's because we can see each other's shadow, but we can't see our own. I can't see my own blind spots.
Right.
That's why they're blind spots.
Hence the definition of them as blind. Yeah.
Yeah. But my partner can see my blind spots, and I believe I can see hers. And so in an intimate relationship, one of the dynamics that's going on is you're attempting to point out your partner's blind spots. if you care about them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so in this current relationship, what makes it so good is that I've stopped resisting and defending like I used to do when previous partners would try to draw something to my attention about myself. If I didn't like what I was hearing, I'd pretty quickly go into defensiveness and dismissiveness and was not able to hear it. But now my partner can say something about me and I notice I get a bit prickly. I might want to get a bit defensive about it. I'm like,
That's a shadow.
This is one of those times when I think I need to consider that what she's pointing out to me I can't see, and that if I was willing to look at it, I probably could see it and then own it and take responsibility for it. So I think that, yeah, there's always going to be things I can't see and that are blind, and so I value that in a relationship. I see that as a beneficial thing, that if I can't see my blind spots and my partner can, and it would be worthwhile and benefit me to be able to see those, then I'm now open to hearing that, whereas in the past there was just the ego defending and dismissing. And so is that a dynamic you notice in your current relationship? Do you point out limitations or blind spots to each other? Or
Absolutely.
You do, yeah.
All the time. And the cool thing is that we, so far, and I honestly have no reason to believe that it will change, so far we don't get triggered. We can very authentically point out to each other in an empathetic way what we see. And we've both so far been able to accept and look at that. Oh, and sometimes we disagree, but it's not a defensive disagreeing. It's like, are you sure you're seeing it right? Because I feel this rather, but a lot of the time it's just like, oh, okay, whoa, yeah, I didn't realize, but yeah, that is what's going on here. And that can happen quite easily and quite often, especially when there's children around you. Oh, watch and see. Watch and see
What's going to change? What's going to change when my child arrives?
For sure, because, I mean, early on it's just a blob, but once they start interacting, I think that what you might see is that your partner's got a way that she believes children should be parented. This comes from all her conditioning, her parents, whatever. And you've got your way that comes from your conditioning, your childhood, your parenting. And I can absolutely guarantee you they're not the same idea. There will be some level of crossover, but there'll be certain things that you absolutely are not on the same page with. That's where the big thing comes in, because how much are you willing to let go of what
your ideas or opinions are?
Of your ideas and opinions of how it should be done.
Your partner's got a young boy, a young son.
That's correct.
And so is this what you're speaking to? Like, is it in regard to him? Like, is that where some of the differences?
Yeah, to a certain extent.
Yes.
Because, coming from a background where I've had 4 children that have gone through their childhood with me, is a very different dynamic than a single child who's been with a single mum up till now.
Right.
8 years, 9 years, whatever. So the dynamic between them is very different than it would be if there were more children for a start, because as soon as there's competition, then everything changes for the children and for the parents. So there's that. And there's the fact that we were, although not a superb relationship, there was both of us there for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So there was that kind of interplay of the 2 different parents, whereas with him, it's a lot of the time being with his single mom as well. So, definitely, there's definitely like huge discrepancy between my experiences and her experiences, and the way we've learnt how to parent our children. And so it brings up some interesting stuff.
Some conflict or some disagreements, but because you've gone through the process of shadow work and you know to stop and reflect and look at, is this what's being pointed out to me part of my shadow that I just need to look at and take responsibility for, rather than get, defensive and dismissive and argumentative or push back on.
Yeah, that's not happening.
That's not happening. Yeah,
that's
great.
not happening. It's actually really good. And I've got to the point now where I actually, before I even say anything, I kind of examine my shadow and see, where's this coming from, what I'm about to say? Where is this coming from? Is it real? Is it true? Is it a good thing to say? Does it matter?
Is it useful?
Is it useful? And then often I'm just like, it's not.
Right.
It's all good. And I think she does that too.
Yeah.
And I think it's a valuable thing to do, I think perhaps we should all consider being a little bit more thoughtful and circumspect about the things we blurt out before we do, especially when they involve other people and their actions. So I try to do that.
Engage the mind before opening the mouth.
Yeah, and do some deep consideration about what are the effects of this, even if it is true. What will be the effect of saying it now in this current environment, as opposed to not saying it at all, or saving it to say later when maybe the environment is slightly different. So I try to consider that.
Yeah, in regard to conflict in relationship, this is something that I've noticed for myself too. So I witnessed my parents fight a lot. Like, they would scream, argue, throw things at each other, wave knives at each other. I've seen my father punch my mother.
Whoa.
It was pretty hectic, and then they separated, and after a year, then they got back together. Then there was more fighting. Then they broke up again, and they finally divorced when I was about 15. And so that influenced me too, in terms of some shadow, in terms of relationship, because I equated fights equals breakup. So if there's conflict in relationship or fighting in relationship, the relationship's doomed.
It's over.
Because that's what I witnessed. So in my previous relationships, whenever there was arguments or fights, I'm like, well, why go on? It's only going to end anyway.
It's done.
So I would pull out. And then in my current relationship, there's not a lot of conflict, but there's still some conflict, because relationships have conflict in them. I'm not looking for a conflict-free relationship. But I've noticed that there was conflict that would get quite argumentative and quite heated, and I'd feel myself wanting to walk away, and my partner would pick up on it, and she'd go, where are you going? I'm like, well, what's the point? We're fighting, we're only going to break up. She goes, what are you talking about? We're just having a disagreement or an argument. That doesn't mean we're breaking up. I'm like, well, that's what I've always thought it meant. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, well, fights don't equal breakup. But that's what I had it, distilled.
That was your story. That's the story that you had been carrying.
Yeah, and it was unconscious. And so now in my current relationship, we'll have some conflicts. We might even have a heated argument or raise our voice even. And I'm like, it's okay. It's no threat to the relationship, because I'm committed. I'm all in. We're having a family. I'm not going anywhere. And so that was a part of my shadow that I had to uncover to even commit to stay in the relationship. And since then, now we'll sometimes have a little disagreement or something, a little bit of heated exchange. And whereas before we'd have to come back and repair that, now it's just like, oh, that was nothing. That's just water off a duck's back. That's just a little bit of friction in a day. Or I might be in a bit of a mood, or I might be a bit stressed. And so there's less conflict and less to do even about the little bit of conflict that there is sometimes.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I see exactly what you're saying, and I think I can honestly say that I've experienced exactly the same thing now. We have disagreements, and we have sometimes fairly heated discussions. And in the beginning, I came from a family where there were heated discussions at dinner table. We'd sit around the table as a family, and we would let loose about all sorts of stuff, and my dad, being a missionary, was always lecturing everybody about how things were good or not good and whatever, and then we'd be like, but why? And because our friends this and whatever, and there was a lot of that kind of disagreement and discussion. And to me, that was just healthy family discourse. You know, we were just being a family and settling where what was allowed and where the boundaries were and so on. But some people didn't grow up like that. Their parents were all very quiet with each other. If there was a disagreement, it was behind closed doors, don't let anybody see, or whatever the case may be. And I think when I first met Suni, she would sometimes get quite distressed when it was clear that we disagreed on a point. We would have a discussion and we'd disagree on the point, and it wouldn't even necessarily need to be a heated discussion, but it would need to be very much like, no, I think it's this, and other one like, no, I think it's this. Oh, but also this, you know, and it would just be that kind of thing, and we could not agree. So eventually we agreed to disagree. And in the beginning, she would sometimes be a bit rocked by that, you know. It would disturb her a little bit. But I explained to her how we grew up in my family and how it was absolutely no way a reflection of how much I cared for her, the way I held my position on things. And I didn't expect her to give up her position.
Right.
To protect the relationship or anything. I would rather she didn't protect the relationship like that, and that she would hold her position so that I authentically got to know who she was.
Right.
And it's getting better and better, you know, but it's a thing that one needs to get used to if one's not used to it, because so it seems like it's similar to what's happening with you. The aftermath is getting less and less. The fallout is almost insignificant now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's I still get surprised sometimes when I look back and think that it took me to get to 60 before I was ready for a relationship. Like, I'm still blown away by that fact, you know. But you know, I am where I am. I'm in a happy relationship, and it's been a hell of a ride.
Cool. And that ride's about to change a lot,
Right.
man. With
I'm
the,
at the
baby,
top
with
of
the
the-
baby coming, you're going to...
I'm up at the top of the roller coaster.
Yeah, that's happening.
Yeah, awesome.
That's happening.
Bring it on.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we might wind it up. It's been a long conversation, but a really fruitful one. And I didn't know where it was going to go. I just thought we'd wing it. But I think there's a lot of juicy stuff in that. And I really want to thank you for your insights and for your generosity of sharing your story, your background, some private things, and you just being willing to, and also to share with the audience like what looking at Into the Dark and those unowned and shadow aspects has given you. Because maybe people listening to this podcast might hear some possibility for themselves, and then they might become interested in, well, I need to explore those dark places too and find the gold that's in there. So, thanks a lot, and maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, well, awesome. Thanks, Pete. And thank you for your shadow work course that literally turned a light on my life. So, perhaps we will do it again sometime.
Thanks, Minos.